So, in the United States today, we tend to think of nations or groups or ethnicities or nationalities in like more European terms, okay? And also in terms from other continents as well, Asia and the Middle East kind of use the same framework to organize ethnic groups and nationalities. But the Native Americans had a very different culture and a way of organizing themselves and kind of categorizing themselves. And, we know about them having tribes, but what they would do, they would form things that, we refer to as confederacies or confederations of tribes. So these tribes, didn't exist in isolation. They were kind of, I don't want to use the word united with because that can mean a lot of different things, but they were kind of allied with other tribes that shared certain similarities like language, culture. They may have all been descended from one tribe originally and then split off into separate groups, but maintained the memory of the fact that they were originally one tribe and so kind of got along with each other and treated each other as allies. And this didn't just exist in one instance, okay? There were multiple confederations of tribes. So oftentimes you'll hear today like Native American ethnic groups referred to by the name of the confederation that their tribe was a part of, okay? Or later on that became their only identity when originally they were part of like a smaller tribe. And the languages that these groups spoke oftentimes were variations of like the same mother language. Okay, so how everybody's got their own dialects. I don't want to necessarily compare it to dialects because I'm not an expert on Native American language, but they were part of like language families, and a lot of them shared ethnic similarities and especially cultural similarities. So when one tribe would go to war, a lot of times the other tribes would be on it with them. They were allies in a sense, these confederations. Okay, and then they would go to war with other confederations. And a lot of times, these confederations would actually add tribes that were not related to them, okay, into their confederation, like because of taking captives in war, because of just absorbing them into, their own tribe through territory or like adopting them in. Okay, so there were a lot of different confederations that had been formed in a lot of different ways all over the country, and they didn't all necessarily stay in the same place. And that was part of the problem. One of the reasons why they went to war with each other a lot was because they would constantly move territories to follow the migrations of herds, or when one region would be depopulated of animals, so that they couldn't hunt anymore in that region, they would have to move to a different spot, and that would bring them into conflict with the group that was over there. So this was going on a lot way back before the Europeans ever even got here. But this is what Europeans found. All the written records that we have are from Europeans because the Native Americans didn't really keep or at least maintain the kind of records that would allow us to read it, written down by people that lived back then. They obviously have oral histories that they passed down, but most of the written stuff that we have today is from European explorers. When European explorers first came to the area that we now know as the state of Illinois, there was a confederation of about 12 to 13 tribes living in this region, along with some other tribes that I'm going to get to in a little bit. But this confederation was called the Illinois Confederation. Obviously, that's a European term. But these were tribes that spoke a language that was part of the Algonquin language family. Now, some of you who live in this area, in the Chicagoland area, probably heard the term Algonquin before to refer to, school districts, parks, and stuff like that. The name is used to name a few things around here. And when I first saw that stuff, I had always thought growing up that Algonquin was the name of an actual Indian tribe. Okay, that's actually a language family. The Algonquin language family is a language family that spans all regions of the United States, and there's subdivisions of this language family. So the tribes that were members of this Illinois Confederation, one of the biggest ones was the Kaskaskia, okay, the Cahokia, after which that Cahokia Mounds site is named. Now, they were not the ones who built those mounds, okay, that was the Mississippian people, but they were the tribe that became associated with that region. Okay, the Peoria tribe, which a lot of you guys might know is a town, in Illinois. A lot of people from Peoria have actually hit me up on this channel wanting me to do videos about that. The Tamaroa, the Moingwena, the Mishigamea, the Chepusa, the Chincoa, the Coricoantanan, which I'm probably pronouncing wrong. Obviously I'm not an expert in this language. The Espaminkia, the Moroa, and the Tapwara. Some of these tribes became absorbed later into other tribes, okay, because of wars and stuff like that. So one of the Algonquin languages was called Miami, Illinois. By Europeans, it's called that. The word for Illinois, actually, the native word was Inoka, okay, but Illinois was kind of like, I believe, a French twist on like that word, which a lot of these words that you might hear, are variations on the various terms that the natives used to refer to it. But Miami, Illinois was one of the languages that, was part of that Algonquin language family that the tribes here spoke. And the Mishigamea were an exception to this. They spoke a language called Siawan. This was at the time when Europeans first came through in the 1600s. Now, by around the mid 1700s, okay, the mid 18th century, the only tribes that really remained were the Cahokia, the Kaskaskia, the Mishigamea, the Peoria, and the Tamaroa. Now, that isn't necessarily because those other tribes went extinct. It was because they got absorbed into those nations. Okay, it was just kind of, I don't want to use the word clicking up, but, joined up with them and just became one. So a lot of the Illinois Confederation eventually moved to reservations outside of Illinois. A lot of them were killed off in a war, which I'm going to get to in a second, which actually was in response to the killing of a chief named Pontiac by a Peoria warrior. That's what the tradition says, that Pontiac was assassinated. He was the chief of the Odawa tribe. I'm going to get to that later on. But there's still about 75,000 Native Americans living in the city of Chicago itself. And a lot of times, people just pass by them, not recognizing them as natives. A lot of times they get mistaken for Mexicans or some type of Latinos, which, I mean, most Latinos have, Native American from south of, the border anyways, just different tribes, but still Native American. But, yeah, there's still about 75,000 of them here. They do have a number of issues that they are facing that they're trying to, address. And it's still a struggling community here, but they're making it, man. I mean, they're not dying out. They're not in the past. They're still here going strong, 75,000. Back in like the early 1800s, a guy named Benjamin Drake, who was a historian, he wrote about this in 1848. And he said that the Illinois Confederation was attacked by a group of tribes. One was the Sauk, the Fox, the Sioux, the Chippewa, the Ottawa, and the Potawatomis, and then the Cherokee and the Choctaw came up from the south and attacked. And this was related to the killing of that chief Pontiac, who I was referring to. He, like I said, was the chief of the Odawa tribe. Now, Odawa and Ottawa is the same thing. It's just a later pronunciation of it. The Cahokias, the Kaskaskias, and the Peorias and the Illinois Confederation, they were almost destroyed because of that. They lived in wigwams and longhouses. They both hunted and harvested crops, okay, and gathered. They got food any way they could get it. And they were normally tribes that kind of inhabited villages. Okay, so they were not nomadic tribes like some of the other tribes that were, hunter tribes. But the Kaskaskias in particular, which eventually became one of the bigger tribes in the Confederation, they had something called a grand village, which had about 20,000 people. It was really more like a city over at Utica, Illinois, if I'm pronouncing that right, which is a town outside of Chicago. And that was one of the largest urban centers. Living by a river, by a water source, was very important to them. And most of these Illinois people lived along the Illinois River from a place called Starved Rock to the Mississippi. And the reason why they went there is because the Dakota Sioux and the Fox and the northern tribes were harassing them. Now, the Iroquois also were raiding them, okay, and that reduced their numbers a lot. The Iroquois were causing them a lot of problems. And also, one thing that severely took down their numbers, when the French came in, okay, to trade with them, they introduced something that turned out to be a curse for the Native Americans until the present day. And this is one of the things that greatly reduced their numbers, and that is liquor. Okay, this devastated the Native Americans, man. And to this day, this is a scourge on their community. They just, I mean, it's been a scourge to everybody that, has had it, really. I mean, alcoholism is a huge problem worldwide, but especially for them. So when they killed the chief Pontiac, and then the tribes took revenge on them, the survivors actually went to the French settlers over by Kaskaskia, and then the Sauk, the Fox, and the Kickapoo, and the Potawatomis took over the territory that the Illinois Confederation had held. So in 1832, the Illinois tribes sold the lands that they had retained. This is according to Encyclopedia Britannica, moving to Kansas and then to what's called Indian Territory in present-day Oklahoma. So the current population that they have is estimated to be about 1,500 people that are descended from the Illinois tribes. So the Illinois had already had problems with the Sioux, the Osage, the Pawnee, the Arikara, and the Quapaw tribes. But the problems with the Iroquois, which started in the 1650s, and the reason why they came under attack from them was because the Iroquois were hunters, and they had killed off all the animals in the lands that they were hunting, and so they were moving into new territory. The Iroquois would also trap for animals, so they moved into their turf basically, and in 1680, the Iroquois killed or captured more than 700 Tamaroa near the mouth of the Illinois River. This is according to the Legends of America history website. Now, as you move on a little bit further into the 1700s, another problem that they started to face when it comes to population was disease from the Europeans. As you guys probably know, Europeans, Asians, Africans are all very close by sea, in a lot of instances by land as well. Those three races had immunities to a lot of diseases that people in the Western Hemisphere, in the Americas, did not have. They had never had trading contact. People had been going back and forth between Europe, Africa, and Asia for centuries, millennia actually. And they had built up immunities to a lot of these diseases that the Native Americans just did not have the equipment to deal with biologically. And so when they became exposed to these from the Europeans, they started to die off, at like alarming numbers. So they eventually became absorbed into the Peoria tribe by the 1830s. They were only about 300 people strong at that point, and they gave up the last of their lands in Illinois and settled on a reservation in eastern Kansas. They merged with the Wea and Piankashaw tribes in 1854 and became known as the Confederated Peoria tribe. But in 1867, they left Kansas and moved to that new reservation in northeast Oklahoma. And several years later, they were joined on the reservation by members of the Miami tribe. So the Confederated Peoria officially merged with the Miami tribe in 1873 and formed what was called the United Peoria and Miami tribe. That whole union was gone by the 1920s. In 1959, the U.S. government dissolved the Peoria tribal government, but the tribal members began the process to regain federal recognition, which they achieved in 1978. So today, most of the descendants of the Illinois are enrolled in what is called the Peoria tribe of Miami, Oklahoma. So the Illinois Confederation, even though they were separate tribes, they all kind of identified with one another and recognized that they were all Illinois, like this loosely affiliated group. But they recognized that they had a lot of commonalities and sided with one another. And there was a single chief who was the head of all the tribes. He was like a grand chief, was what they called him, like the great chief or the grand chef, according to the French. And he actually, in the 1700s, the head of the tribes, the particular chief that they had at that time, his name was Mamantuensa, and he actually went to France in 1725. And a person who went with him was a Mishigamea village chief whose name was Chicago. Okay, so it's Chicago with a U on the end of it. And these were not the same in rank, obviously. Like the Grand Chief was a lot higher than the Mishigamea village chief. There's multiple historical sources. One of them disputes the fact that that chief actually made that trip, but others believe that he did. More in the next videos into the details about the tribes that attacked them, specifically the Iroquois, and kind of specific details of those wars and how that went. And so these people are still around. Don't think that they're gone. I wouldn't look at it as like they've been extinct or anything like that. That's far from the truth. If there's nothing else to take away from this video, hopefully it's that. But they are still here, just in a different location, and there's still a lot of Native Americans here. Now, what tribes the Native Americans that are here inhabiting Chicago today are from, I couldn't tell you. I haven't met all of them and asked all of them. But yeah, the Illinois tribes officially have moved to another reservation in Oklahoma. This is your boy Winnie City Report. I'm out.